Hi, I'm psychology professor Bruce Hinrichs. In this video, I will introduce you to the basic concepts of human memory. First thing to understand about memory is it is not a recording device. A lot of people think that our memory is just a way of recording what happens to us, what we hear, what we see, and so on, and that we just store it in our brain, that memory, and then pull it up later. A lot of people say, I have a bad memory, and I think, well, maybe you don't have a bad memory, you just have a wrong idea about what memory is. If you think memory is a recording device, then yeah, you probably think you have a bad memory. So it is not true that our brain just copies the information that comes in and then we play it back later. Rather, memory is more like perception, that we create or recreate a memory, and it has all kinds of misinformation in it. In fact, memory is very tricky. Memory is so tricky that we even have what are called false memories. A lot of what you have stored in your brain as a memory actually did not happen. The person who has studied false memory the most is psychologist Elizabeth Loftus. She has spent her real career studying false memory. Here's a very simple example. She showed people a video of cars smashing together and then later asked them to remember the events that happened in the video. And one of the questions was, how fast do you think the cars were going when they, and then she used different words, contacted each other, hit each other, bumped into each other, collided into each other, smashed into each other. And it turns out the word that she used influenced their memory. This is called the misinformation effect, meaning your memory can be affected by information that you get afterwards. Here's another example of research by Elizabeth Loftus called the lost at the mall technique. You interview people and you ask them questions, and then they come back next week and next week and next week, and you interview them over and over again. And it turns out if you ask a certain question over and over again, people start to remember it actually happening. So you take people and you ask them, when you were a child, did you ever get lost at the mall? No, I didn't. But if you ask that question over and over and over again, after a while, about 25% of people develop a false memory of being lost at the mall when they were 5 years old. False memories can even be influenced by just asking people to imagine that an event happened. And here's a list of things that people will remember actually happening more often if you first ask them to imagine it. Imagine that you got a bad haircut. Imagine that you want a pet in some event. Imagine an emergency room visit. And notice that people who do the imagining develop memories more often. These are false memories. When we have a memory, it means that something must have changed in our brain. And we call that, in psychology, we call that the engram. So the word engram means the physical representation in your brain. So when we say you have a memory, usually we mean in your conscious awareness, in your mind. Do you remember what you had for dinner yesterday? Okay, if you do, that means there must be something in your brain, some physical representation. We call that an engram. Okay, what are engrams made of? What are the physical representations of memory? They're made of what we call neural networks, networks of neurons in the brain. So neurons hook up together and form a network, and that represents a memory. So a memory, the engram for a memory, is a network of cells in your brain that gives you that recollection. Many of our memory engrams, the neural networks in our brain, are created because we have a part of the brain called the hippocampus. This is our memory registration area. I call it the librarian of the brain. So when we remember an event, it's because our hippocampus has stored that information and can then recall it from the neural networks in the brain. Here's a hippocampus that has been removed from a human brain on the left. And you see on the right a picture of a seahorse, which the word hippocampus means. The word hippocampus means seahorse. And you can see why it's called a seahorse. It has that exact shape. You have two hippocampi, one on the left and one on the right. So here's an illustration that shows the location on the inside of the temporal lobe on the side of the head. Here again, we see the location of the hippocampus looking straight on at the brain, like straight back from the eyes, left and right hippocampi. And then from the side, we can see on the medial part, the middle of the temporal lobe, hippocampus, the librarian of the brain. Here again, we see the location of the hippocampi. And the hippocampus is the part of the brain that when we learn something like what you're learning right now, the hippocampus will hold on to that information, like giving a book to a librarian, and then we'll put it on the shelf. So the hippocampus is going to put that information into storage, into neural networks, and that takes some time. How long it takes depends upon what it is that's being remembered and who's doing it. So the hippocampus takes the information and stores it in neural networks in the brain, and then later is able to pull it back out. So of course, when scientists look at a hippocampus, they find that it is connected to many, many, many different brain areas, and it helps you to store memories and then retrieve them later, but only certain kinds of memories, as we'll see in just a minute. So what happens when the hippocampus is damaged? How does a hippocampus get damaged? Well, sometimes by brain diseases like Alzheimer's disease, sometimes by a brain tumor or a stroke in the brain, or even smoking marijuana can damage the hippocampus. Other drugs can probably damage hippocampus. So there's different ways a hippocampus could be damaged. What happens then? We have a very famous case of a man named Henry Molaison, who for many, many years was known by his initials HM. He was the most studied person in the history of psychology. And he was studied so much because he had his hippocampi removed surgically when he was a young man. So what happened to Henry is that he had had an accident when he was 8 years old, and it caused him to have epilepsy. And later, when he was a young man, he went to a surgeon who cured his epilepsy by removing his medial temporal lobe, including his hippocampi. So almost all of his hippocampi were removed. And it was discovered later that he had severe memory problems. HM lived in a nursing home. And when he died in 2008, a scientist went and got his brain, which he had given to science. And the brain was taken to a laboratory and it was sliced. And this was done streamed live on the internet. And something like 300,000 people watched HM's brain being sliced. Here's a still photograph of that video. After HM had his hippocampus removed surgically to cure his epilepsy, he suffered from what is called anterograde amnesia. This essentially means he could not create new memories. And so a psychologist was assigned to study him. That psychologist was Brenda Milner. Here I show a picture of her when she was young and first studying HM, and then also a picture of her today. She's like 98 years old and still teaching psychology. And she's won many, many awards for her study of memory. In fact, her studies of HM revolutionized our ideas about memory. One of the great ideas that Brenda Milner had was to give HM a test that we sometimes use in psychology to study learning. And this is a mirror drawing task, or sometimes called mirror tracing, where you look in a mirror and you try to draw something. In this case, try to draw a star. Try to draw in between the lines of these stars that are shown. And this is very difficult to do looking in a mirror because the mirror reverses the image left and right. But if you keep doing it over and over again, you get better at it. You learn. So the question was, will HM get better at this? So Brendan Milner gave HM the mirror drawing task over and over and over again. And each time he would take it, he'd say he had no memory of ever having taken again. He could not create a memory of having done this event before. However, he did get better at it, which meant what? It meant that there's two kinds of memory. That on the one hand, he doesn't remember doing the task, but on the other hand, his brain remembers how to do it. So there's a conscious memory, but there's also a how-to memory. All right, so memory is divided into two categories, one called declarative memory, sometimes called explicit memory. This is the memory that's in our mind of facts and events that have happened to us. And then secondly, we have procedural memory or non-declarative or implicit memory. This is our memory of how to move our body around or our emotional reactions to things. So in the case of the hippocampus, when HM had his hippocampus removed, he lost his declarative memory, but he did not lose his procedural memory. So hippocampus is important for our conscious, explicit memory of facts and events that we have in our mind, our declarative memory. But hippocampus is not important for our procedural memories of how to move our body or how to have an emotional reaction to something. On the one hand, we have a declarative memory, our conscious aware memory, which requires a hippocampus. So which bus stop will take me home? This is a declarative memory, something we have in our mind. So what you usually call memory, that is memory of facts and events that are in your mind, we call declarative memory. You also have what is called procedural memory. These are the automatic body movements that you make, like riding a bike or swimming or driving a car or typing on a keyboard, and also your emotional reactions. If you were bit by a dog, now you're afraid of dogs. That's a procedural memory. Your brain remembers to be afraid when you see a dog. That does not require hippocampus. Procedural memories are stored in the cerebellum of the brain in the case of body movements, or in the amygdala of the brain and surrounding regions for emotional reactions. Well, let's take it a little bit farther. Declarative memories, that is your conscious memory, what you call memory, psychologists divide into two categories. One is called semantic memory. This is our memory of general facts. What is the capital of France? Paris. What is the plural of the word mouse? There's one mouse, there's two mice. Yeah, that's called a semantic memory, your memory of some general fact. But secondly, we have what we call episodic memories. These are personal experiences that we have. So what you have for supper yesterday is not a general fact. It's not a semantic memory. This is a fact that's specific to you. You remember what you had for supper yesterday. That is called an episodic memory. So if you went to Paris, you remember the events that happened to you there. That's your episodic memory. And episodic and semantic memories are both part of declarative memory, but they're stored separately in the brain, and they're two different categories of declarative memory. All right, so memory today in psychology is divided into declarative and non-declarative or procedural. So declarative memory includes episodic memories, remembering events that happened to you, and semantic memories, remembering general facts. Those are declarative memories. We also have non-declarative memories that are like body procedures or emotions. And these are stored in different places in the brain. And so memory turns out to be extremely more complicated than people used to think it was. And this is all due to research that started with HM. Hey, I hope you enjoy learning about human memory, a little bit of the basic concepts. And be sure to check out my other videos on my channel, Brucey. Bye, everybody.